Okay, welcome to my little video on the pit lane's reaction to the steward's decision for the DJR Penske engine breach. In this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about identities in and around the sport and how they've commented and how they've reacted. As you can see right in front of us here, we have the steward's decision. It's a SpeedCAF article dated Sunday the 10th of November. It's really important that people read this. And what I'm going to do, you can see how there's a lot of information in here. I'm going to skip down to the decision. I'm hoping you guys can see this. I hope it's in focus. It is not necessary for us to resolve the number of contentions put by DJR Penske. That's a reaction to the defence that Team Penske mounted in the stewards hearing. As indicated above, we agree with the DRD that regardless of the cause or the extent of the breach, the disqualification of the drivers of Car 17 from qualifying and top 10 shootout of Race 25 is required. Whether the breach was deliberate or known might be relevant to the imposition of a further penalty only. In this case, there is no evidence from which we could conclude the breach was deliberate or known. Let me read that last part again. In this case, there is no evidence from which we could conclude the breach was deliberate or known. What that all means is that, like in many situations when there's a breach, it's a judgment of fact. Like if you got a clearance, if it's outside the tolerance, it doesn't matter how it got there, it just matters that it is. So once you agree to it, the defence mechanism is nil, and what's happened here is a penalty was going to be applied. DJR Penske felt that was too harsh, so they got into a bit of a hearing. They presented evidence that supported effectively that this wasn't deliberate. The sport has agreed with that, but it said it's irrelevant. It's a little bit about what happened, back in Newcastle when Scotty lost his title with the pit lane speeding. It's around the similar sort of thing, like the evidence you mount in your defence is not really relevant the way they approach things, and a lot of sports are like that. In fact, there's a lot of things in life that are like that. So there's a lot of detail on this. It's really important, but the key, just got to find this. What we need to do is come down to a summary of DJR Penske contentions were. So back up here further, there's a list of evidence that's been presented. But what I want to do here is there's three things here that are really of great interest to us. The inlet and exhaust valve lift is regularly checked by Supercars technical personnel. Indeed, the valve lift on the DJR Penske engines has been checked approximately 10 times this season, including on the Q engine, with no issue observed. Because the checking of the valve lift was a expected process, it can be inferred that DJR Penske would not have deliberately used an engine that exceeded lift. An in-engine check of the valve lift is commonly performed at events and is a straightforward process, particularly on cylinders 1 and 5, which are at the front of the engine and easily accessible. Of the inlet valve lift exceedances, 2 of the cylinders were 1 and 5. Again, because it could be anticipated that the valve lift in cylinders 1 and 5 would be checked, it can be inferred that it is unlikely that DJR Penske would have knowingly allowed the valve lift in those cylinders to be exceeded. I'm now going to skip down to the last. Everything's important, but I want to focus on as fewer points to make my point as I possibly can. The Q engine had been run on a supercar technical dyno after race 25, and after 2 power runs was not exceeded the mandate maximum accumulated power number, or the EPWA. I'm pretty sure the A stands for average number. Further power runs were not possible because Supercars technical personnel observed water vapour being emitted from the oil tank, which was consistent with the issues observed at the Bathurst event, and which had led to the engine being replaced prior to race 25. Thus, it was submitted that there was an issue with the Q engine, and possibly that the issue had some bearing on the valve lift couldn't be dismissed, and further, there was no demonstrated performance advantage from the maximum lift valve lift exceedance. Okay, so what this means is 2 things. There's an expectation of checking. there's a culture, and we later find out the sheer number of checks performed on car 17 and DJRTP Penske would have them conclude that we're going to Bathurst, Scott's going to break the lap record, we're going to get checked, we're going to get found out if we do anything wrong, right? So that's a base logic right there. I'm referencing cylinders 1 and 5 because this report clearly says that 1 and 5 are faulty, and they are the easiest valves to check. So 1 and 5 cylinders are the ones that have exceeded the clearance, which is in direct contrast to Russell England, and this is the purpose of this. Russell is one of the guys in... Basically what's happened here is we've been able to see the way pit lane has reacted. It's an assumption, like they're ignoring certain things. Russell drives the nail home. He's gone to someone in the sport, in pit lane, and the way they've acted without being explained, that information's gone to Russell. It supports, it's conclusive, the word I'm looking for is, it's complementing what we're actually seeing. It's confirming it. That people inside the sport are reacting on the premise that they are guilty and that they know they are guilty, and they're ignoring stewards' facts. They're effectively putting the sport into disrepute. And then the last point, the third point I raised, is that it's a rare situation where a team submits a request for an engine change based on data that's supported by the category as well. They've agreed that, yes, that doesn't look right. We will permit you to change the engine. So it's important distinction here to realise that the terms of reference in terms of a Q engine, that doesn't mean the sport has qualifying engines. It categorically does not. It's a controlled engine. That engine was intended to be, so it's engine 009, I think, from memory. The article just refers to the Q engine because in this particular case, 2 engines are checked. So they're distinguishing between the qualifying engine and the race engine. The race engine's fine. The qualifying engine would be, this is the engine in question. So we'll just take a step back. Qualifying at Bathurst is not a big deal. We've seen, like, to win from pole is actually, the statistics don't support that being what you really need to do. So by what logic would Penske risk a DQ just for the sake of qualifying? Logically, that makes no sense. Then add to that the sheer volume of checks that's going on. How are they going to get away with it? Think about that part, because no one in pit lane wants to. When that's been submitted to, I think it was David Reynolds got that question. He got a number of questions, and his reaction was to point people in the direction of the profile picture for the person making the claims or asking the questions. It's like what he's trying to do is diminish the value of the questions being asked. It's a deflection. It's a tactic to say, well, you're biased. You're not thinking objectively. And he's not biased. He races for Betty Erebus. Wow, Betty Kaminka, sorry, with their Erebus race team. I don't think you need to go to a profile picture to look at the value of the contribution one makes. That's extraordinary. That's playing the man, not the ball. That's leading down a path of, basically, it's the first step in social bullying, really. That's where the sport's gone. They have collectively en masse lost their brains on this. It's extraordinary. So for me, what we've got here is there's no good at cheating if there's no real belief that you're going to get away with it. That probably sounds bad, but we're seeing here that there's no logical, rational way to think that the sport can get away with it. So it was Ryan Walkinshaw who said that we suspect that they're doing something with the qualifying engines, and he was asked further. Not sure. I'll talk to an engine guy, so he doesn't really know. But for me, he's inadvertently saying that the policing of the category is not up to spec. Okay, so another driver in pit lane, I forget who it was. They said, when we heard they were changing the engine on the Saturday, we're thinking, what are they up to? Really? No, you're not. You're not thinking that at all. Because if you did, why didn't pit lane go to the stewards and ask for that engine to be checked for clearances? Everything that could possibly be checked at the track. So we've heard in the stewards report that quite frequently cylinders 1 and 5 get checked. Well, why didn't you do that? You've sealed it. And then if DJR knew about it, they've just handed over a smoking gun from which they're going to get penalised. Why would you do that? Wouldn't you make steps to either make it so that that engine can't be checked, or make sure that the engine was compliant before asking for it to be changed? Surely there's got to be a way around that. I mean, look, the suggestion from the sport is that they're getting away with it so they can get away, they can keep on changing their qualifying spec as contended by people in pit lane, but then they can't change it to save themselves from a DQ. Does this make sense to anyone? Has the world completely lost its brain? In front of me I have. This is the note. So what's happened here? I'll read the note first. This is a revised version from the originally published episode 14. This is the enforcer and the dude. As through our fan feedback, some fans have highlighted inconsistencies of the engine analysis shown. There has been conflicting information with regards to what has been told behind the scenes and what has been made public. That's a real problem. It's a bigger problem that he decided to present the behind the scenes without knowing what was in the public domain, setting up a conflict. So, if I use the same defence on Penske, I'll have to use it on Russell, won't I? I have to be consistent, I have to be credible, and I have to have integrity. You wouldn't knowingly present what he did if you were aware of what was in the public domain, just as Penske wouldn't knowingly commit an infraction knowing that they were going to be checked. What's good for the goose has to be good for the gander. In the interest for remaining unbiased and impartial, the content in question has been removed from the latest episode. This is not what the show is meant to be about with regards to getting involved in other people's fights. That's unusual for Russell. Paul and I remain independent and are simply trying to explain situations that might not be detailed to the fans. We got 13 out of 14 episodes right. I guess that's not bad odds. He was quite prepared to paint a picture of Penske cheating on less odds than that. In actual fact, that sort of logic was used by Scott Pye to associate Scott McLaughlin with Lance Armstrong. Took just one. I'd actually dispute 13 out of 14. We got into this whole parody thing because of the way Mustang looked. It dominated the early part of the sport. In another episode where they have Ryan Story and Roland Dane on, a bombshell was literally dropped, and both Paul Morris and Russell Ingall sat on their hands and didn't delve deeper into what it actually meant. We heard from Roland Dane that he did not oppose the thought of changing the category, the competition, to facilitate a better looking Mustang. Had he done so, it's unlikely we would have had as much of the aero issues that we would have. In the same segment, he's basically saying that when they were doing the homologation from the ZB, he had an issue with the roof weight. He approached the category to find out what roof weight he could run. His solution would be to grant the Nissan and the Falcon composite materials. And they go on to say that that was rejected, and he names Tickford and Tim Edwards, and it's painted as though those guys are dumb, they don't know what they're doing, they don't understand COG. The biggest thing fans need to understand is, aside from being utter bullshit, a lot of what goes on in the sport is about politics. So when a new car is introduced, one of the advantages that the existing products got is actually knowing what it is, having the data, having experience with that product. And when you change it, when you've got testing restrictions and everything that goes with that, budgetary constraints, having to relearn a change in the way the setup, the cars are really sensitive. It's not the ideal situation. So the other point to it is that both Paul Morris and Russell Ingall would have known that it wouldn't be Tim Edwards that would have been saying this. It wouldn't have just been Tickford. It would have been the commission. It would have been the homologation teams, of which the Kellys are part of. All this was missed. Ryan Story introduces the fact that Tickford acting as it was a feasibility at this point, because Ford weren't involved when Tickford were doing the stuff. When they approached the category said no to the roll cage change. So Ford just didn't go off on their own bat to create the Mustang as it looks. That was forced on them by the sport. And Ryan Storer reiterated, well, no, we made this. And Roland Dane's defence to this was, I wasn't part of the commission. No, he wasn't. He doesn't have to be. He needs to be the boss of the homologation team who would have had a say. So what is Roland saying? That my personal view was I would have supported had I have known. If you'd been more upfront, we would have worked together, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So someone in your team who was on the commission or part of the homologation process acted without your knowledge and support. I do not think so, Roland. The bombshell was two things. If you weren't responsible as a representative of the Holden organisation who would have had an issue with the homologation of the Mustang, if you didn't have an issue, then who the hell did? How did we end up with a car that dominated the first 2 months of profiles in and around the sport when we talk about the parity side of things, how it looked? It dominated. It was a distraction. After the car had been billed as being, the series was going to be the closest in terms of parity, mind you. The second thing was that when Roland asked the question, what weight do I put my roof at? Why didn't anyone ask him, what was your answer? Because what we ended up with is the answer he should have been given as soon as the Kellys and Tickford had said, no, we're going to stay as we are, then the same argument had to be used from the Holden teams against the Mustang. It's up to the new product coming in to match the existing. So what that meant was the category should have said, you need to ballast up your roof. You need to match. Clearly that didn't happen. Paul Morris and Russell Ingall never questioned, we never got an answer. So two things there they dropped the ball on. So I would dispute they got 13 out of 14 right. We had a real opportunity here to get to the bottom of why Mustang looked like it did, and then with respect to how the sport was working to create an unfair advantage ZB compared to FGX. Roland in a little bit later in that segment basically said we should have looked at COG probably when we were doing it. You think? Okay, so what Russell's done in the podcast, he's basically, the whole tone is set by his belief based on what he's been told, where he hasn't verified that cylinders 1 and 5, the easiest to be checked, were cylinders that complied. This is false. This is what the fans pointed out to him. No, that's contrary to the report. He was deleting those comments. I didn't see it myself, but I'm told that he was deleting them, and then in the note that I read, he's given some credit to it. So obviously when you get your content deleted, it's because you're correct. So I'm going to now read what I said, and this ends up getting deleted. I think, Russell, you need to go further here. You were pretty strong with your presentation, and people saw that. So based on that belief, he's got it in his head, it taints the entire presentation. Everything that comes after it is now based on this optic that cylinders 1 and 5 were deliberately created correctly so that they would pass any visual check at the track. Don't ask me how they were going to get away if they won the race, how they were going to get away with it afterwards, but I don't think they think that far ahead. When we see the video amendment, it's covered up in the Seymour portion. So basically his clarification note wasn't visible. You actually had to click on the Seymour to see the note that I've read out to you. You've done more than many people in pit lane this week, but to say there is a conflict between the inside information and what we know in the public is a bit of a cop-out, and that's true. But I gave him credit. At least he has responded. He could have just kept on deleting stuff, but they took that section out. They didn't correct it, and that's what I'm on about here. So I'm pointing out what we know. Here's what we know. There are no qualifying engines. Pit lane has seen fit to put this imagery that Penske might be using hot engines in qualifying. Inadvertently, what that says is the sport is deficient in policing a controlled aspect of the sport, which, in fairness to Russell, they do touch on that. So they should be in agreement. That's the optic they're putting out there. I don't think the sport would agree with it. But that's inadvertently what the drivers are saying. Like, when you suspect that they're doing something with the engine, what you're really saying is the sport doesn't have the ability or the smarts to crack down on them. They're doing something, they're getting away with it. If you know it, then you should be doing something about it. You don't really have a good faith basis. For example, the reaction was, when we heard they were changing the engine on Saturday night, we knew they were doing something wrong. Well, you should have asked for the engine to be checked. You really didn't have an expectation they were doing it. And you certainly, the way they've responded, it doesn't appear as though they're giving any credence or recognition to the engine being faulty. I don't personally get that. We all need to let this sink in. So that's about the policing. In order to change the engine, it had to have an issue. The team saw telemetry suggesting an issue. The sport agreed, and the engine was changed and sealed for a check. People need to think about this. If that engine was hot on purpose, they just handed over a smoking gun that was going to hang them. Why would you not address that? Why would you just hand over evidence to get you DQ'd? Let's not set aside the expectation that they could get away with anything like this. Have a look at the statistics on how many times Penske have been checked this season. Heading into Bathurst, knowing Scott's going to break the lap record, that the engine is going to be checked, by what logic would you purposely set up an engine to get you DQ'd? The engine is next run on the category's dyno first. It does 2 runs and is observed to have an issue consistent with that contended by DJR Team Penske. This means the request to change was justified and proven. No intent to cheat. When the engine was pulled down and the clearance issues were found, let it sink in that the engine confirmed to have a fault and heading to a failure has now been penalised for clearance. The sport has said it's not their position to determine how, but the fact that the clearance was out of tolerance as a fact. It's like a judgment of fact, basically. Unless there is a contention that the steward's report has confused the cylinders at fault, it's accepted that 1 and 5 are 2 of the offending. It's accepted by the sport that due to the ease of which these cylinders are checked, that the team would be working on the possibility of such a check being conducted. There is no evidence of intent. In your original video, you said the exact opposite of what is fact. People have seen that. This needs to be reversed. You and Paul were very prepared to hang DJR Team Penske on the premise of this one assumption. By extrapolation, 2 cylinders that were at 0.7 readings are further back in the engine. It must also be accepted that as these are not using the easy check, these are not using in easy checks, that the entire engine was built to 0.7. And that the suggestion Penske were operating at higher risk is not supported unless either Car 17 race or Car 12 race engines showed a pattern of engineering to a higher tolerance. In short, when you take away the premise of easy-to-check cylinders valves, the entire segment and direction is questionable. You put it out there. In your segment, you champion the ability for the public to judge. You must remain consistent to this ideal and redo the piece and present the facts as they are documented. What pit lane is doing is very poor. What you present is exactly what identities in the support have tried to present. When questioned in the same way, we have been blocked, deleted, made feel that we don't know what we are talking about. We do. We have the ability to judge on the basis of what sounds right. As you were prepared to sell Penske down with an opinion of optics, it's only fair to reveal who is making the sport toxic by agenda. Today we have seen the sport react to what Scott has had to endure to remind drivers and teams there is a code of conduct. Please don't be part of the same sorry situation. Issue an apology to DJR Team Penske and do the segment as it should have been done. You did say that you weren't going to shy away from the hard stuff. This is that. Now, that post was deleted, and he didn't stop there. He went a step further and removed my ability to further communicate on his page. When I questioned him about Twitter, blocked. I said, basically, look, if you've got a problem with it, just say there's no need for censorship. Apparently there is. So what are you trying to hide? I mean, the optic on this is very bad. There's an integrity question here. There's a competency question on how you can get something so wrong, how you can be so far away from what's out there. So you can either say that the report's wrong and my inside sources are right, which would be justification for how they're acting, but when you delve deeper again, it's not supported. It's just not. When you go back and you have a look at this report, I'll show you again. This is the one you're looking for right here. there is it's not supported. The stewards have clearly said that there is no intent, and if there was, this would have been kicked up just as they did with Bathurst with Debris-gate. It would have gone to a higher council for further penalties to be assessed, and then they really would have got into, okay, how did this happen? It's really disappointing that I think it was David Reynolds' show went to the trouble of talking to an engine builder, and there's been no conversation on, well, that engine was faulty. It was shown. So the fact is the team felt they had a crook engine, the category agreed, the engine was changed, and in the process it was sealed to be checked. Is it possible that the motor failure here is responsible for those valve clearances being out? I mean, from a fan's perspective, this is a concern I would have thought a concern for everyone. So either in pit lane they know that's an impossibility, but the stewards have not ruled on it. They probably wouldn't know. You'd need expert testimony. I think DJRTP and Penske were going to do that, as Russell acknowledges the engine builder was sick and unable to attend. So there is that. But with respect to Russell and the way he did his presentation, that conflict of logic basically drove everything that he had to say, to the point that he contended that the qualifying engine was 2 kilometres an hour faster up and down the mountain, and when the race engine was put in, then it was the same as everyone else. It took Paul Morris, of all people, to point out that they're going to say that's about aero. Of course it's about aero. Everyone knows that it's a Ludo trick, and it's one that can be applied to Scott because he can drive the car with basically less downforce than most people. That Cam was the quickest across the top, he was using more downforce. In the race situation, your weakest link in a co-driver situation is the co-driver. You have to make the car comfortable for the co-driver. He's not Scott McLaughlin. Hardly anyone else is. So logically, the performance from Russell here is, I don't know whether he's trying to talk himself into believing it, but it's extraordinary that someone's been able to present information to Russell not check it, he's put it out there, and then he's going to protect those people, basically. He won't protect the association when it comes to building an engine for the purpose of cheating, but he will protect the people who have given him crook information. I don't get it. Now, from a fan's perspective, and this is an opinion, right? Just like these drivers and the identities, they're giving their opinion. Well, I'm doing the same thing. I'm looking at what I can see. And I'm perfectly capable of saying, okay, there's clearly an agenda here. I just don't know why. The evidence seems to suggest that the people who were talking were absent of fact. We had drivers who didn't appear to know that the engine was being pulled out for a reason. We've got the stewards report says that the reason's valid. They found it in testing, and they could only do 2 power runs. What we don't know is how many power runs they'd normally do. Is it 2? Was that insufficient? I don't know. No one wants to talk on that, and there's been plenty of opportunities. Let's just jump to the lowest common denominator and paint the picture that this was deliberate. Again, I refer you to be deliberate, what's your expectation of success? When you are checked this many times, and it's at Bathurst, and it was qualifying, why? Why would you run that risk? Risk versus reward. A fundamental. Why? If you knew your engine was faulty, you're not going to hand it over to the stewards. Not in that state. That's just dumb. Makes no sense to me. Does it make sense to you? If it does, write in the comments. Okay, I think I've rambled on long enough. Again, this is what you want to look at here. There's plenty of other stuff. I can do more videos. There's things from other identities in the sport. I mean, David Reynolds was doing the same thing to people. When you you know, look, when you do something like that and it gets deleted, or if you ask questions of these guys after they've invited for clarification, mind you, when they say, well, look, I'm not sure what you're talking about, so when you go and put the questions out there, when they elect not to answer those questions and further kind of have a form of personal attack, you've got to assume that it's a cover-up, that there's something not right. or there's something that they can't talk about. They're wrong in either way, because if it's something they can't talk about, you can't go there in the first place. That is the very definition of bringing the sport into disrepute. They're very quick to say, well, I can't talk about this or I can't talk about that, but yet they've been really vocal at this back end of the season on something that really should have been pretty well simple and straightforward. I would be saying the exact same things if this was Triple Eight or Walkinshaw or Erebus or Tickford. It comes down to, if you're trying to say this was deliberate and they've been doing it, you're saying that the sport's not checking it. If you had that opinion, you should have been taken it to the stewards. If you really felt that way, you should have had the engine checked right there and then, so that the penalty had to apply right there and then. Starting the back of grid at Bathurst isn't that big of a penalty. It's been done before. I mean, I think it was Jamie Whincup started near back by the end of the first corner. I think he was up to 15th type thing. Look, there's risk, but it's not the penalty. Certainly not the penalty that was applied to Sandown type thing. So, look, again, I really invite comment. I'm pretty disillusioned with the way the sport's conducted itself in the back end of this season, and I think there's people, smart people, that should know better, that have been sucked into basically stupidity. There's no other way of doing it. Logically, rationally, if you look at the situation, the fact that the most checked team in the sport would think for a second they could get away with a qualifying engine for Bathurst based on what's going on this year, based that the car hasn't been faulted. I don't know, if there's some logic in there, I'd love to hear it. Okay guys, till next time, thanks for watching.